We are joined in the studio by Professor Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics at the University of International Business and the Economics. Welcome, sir. Meanwhile, in Singapore, we have Professor Wang Choi, who is president of the Korea Society of International Economic Law. He's now a visiting professor at National University of Singapore. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. First of all, I would like to get answers from both of you. How do you think your economies, South Korea and China, are likely to benefit from the deal? Which exactly is the area that we should really pay attention to? Briefly from you first, Professor Liu.
Well, by specialization with the integration of both economies further into a bigger market, so definitely it's going to reduce the transaction cost for business, and it's going to also contribute to the slower now the growth of both countries' economy. But those sensitive areas, I remember last spring I was in South Korea, and there was a rally of farmers against the possible reduction of tariff for imports of rice from China. So, agricultural area, aquatic products, from China's side, petrochemicals and shipbuilding. So those are the really sensitive areas that really cost more time during the entire 13 years process.
Well, may I just follow up, because I asked you about which area will China benefit the most. Some suggest the investment into South Korea. Is that going to be the case?
Oh,
Briefly,
right.
If you can.
Right. Yes. I think now the investment into South Korea is very minimal as compared to the size of the economy and also compared to the volume of the bilateral trade. So I think with the facilitation program from the FTA, so definitely it's going to not only benefit for the Chinese investors, but also benefit the industry and also the collaboration.
We do not know as to how much that will be, but we do know, Professor Choi, if you can hear me clearly from Singapore, 70% of the agricultural products will be covered by this bilateral free trade agreement. However, not including this free trade agreement about the rice product, which of course Professor Liu mentioned as very sensitive to South Korean farmers, and also auto. So it seems that most of the two, one is the most popular area, the other is really one of the most politically sensitive area, are not being covered.
Yeah, I think that's right. In terms of market access, I don't think China-Korea FTA is really high level because most sensitive areas such as automobile and metal product, LCD panel, which is the main export item from Korea to China, were excluded from the Chinese concession list. And most sensitive agricultural product, including rice and fruits and vegetables, and fishery products are excluded from the Korean concession list. But in terms of the norm setting issue and trade systems or dispute settlement mechanism or investment protection mechanism or IPR protection mechanism, I think Korea-China FTA took quite aggressive approach by which each country can solve the mutual trade barrier issues by pretty much common rules. A problem solving approach. So this kind of aggressive problem solving approach in Korea-China FTA will bring mutual benefit in long term if both parties wisely utilize this kind of mechanism in proper setup.
I see. At this moment, 91%,
and on top of that,
91%, 92%, those are the numbers in which China is going to, in a way, tax-free to import South Korean products, and also for South Korean to import China's. But the question is, it's going to last for 20 years before this 92%, 91% could be achieved. And yet, Professor Choi, we are talking about Chinese economy transforming itself, and South Korea also trying to grab new engines. So will this 20 years be quick enough for the two countries to take advantage of this free trade agreement, at least in this area?
I think 20 years in these days is really long time. So I think both parties should learn to gradually adjust to new environment. So in that sense, I think both parties took a pretty much careful approach But if we take a statistics in 10-year period, only 77% of trade will be eliminated of each tariff from the side of Korea, whereas 66% of Chinese tariffs will be eliminated within 10-year period. So this 77 and 66% is really not high-level FTA compared to any FTA to which Korea has been party so far. Mm-hmm. So in terms of market access, I think both parties took a really slow track approach so that mutually sensitive areas can have more time to adjust their industry into new environment. So that's really good and bad in terms of speed, but I think enough time for industrial adjustment. But as I emphasized, when we take into consideration of other aspects such as investment and IPR protection as well as competition, trade and competition issues. I think both parties took a quite aggressive approach.
I got your point.
That's really,
I got your point.
One of the
Professor Liu,
merit of the
so it is a gradual approach. It seems that both countries are subscribing to this time, even though this is a very historical bilateral trade agreement. So if gradual, what are these countries trying to test one another and itself in order to achieve? And secondly, what could be the significance of this bilateral free trade agreement in terms of encouraging, let's just say, regional free trade agreement between China, Japan, and South Korea, and also creating certain kinds of environment of encouraging Japan and South Korea in joining RCEP or FTAAP, these kind of trade mechanism in the region?
I think, however complex it is really a milestone forward with, of course, certain compromises with either domestic politics and also the rule setting between these two countries. And it really serves to a larger strategy of the further economic integration within the Asian Pacific areas. And I consider this a really early harvest. You see that China entered into the 10+1 with ASEAN, and now with South Korea FTA, and very soon with Australia. So China is really mapping out along this one belt, one road the arena, so we are connecting with many more.
Well, that's what China wants, but at the same time, what I'm trying to ask is how possible or constructive will this bilateral agreement be for the potential of other bilateral trade agreement or multilateral trade agreement, especially China, Japan, and South Korea, with Japan at this moment still pondering about where to go, whether TPP or going into further regional trade agreement. Will that be a constructive way of encouraging Japan to come into the negotiation table?
I think it's a spur because we originally started with the trilateral free trade agreement, and Japan dwindled, and now when South Korea really has a lot of parallel or competitive industry with Japan, and South Korea will be able to benefit more from this the free trade agreement on a bilateral basis. So I think the Japan's industry will be in a kind of stimulated to further this the trilateral agreement.
Well,
and also it's going to pave the way for a larger platform, which is either the FTAAP or RCEP.
All right, Professor Choi, your sense here. This agreement for other trilateral and also international trade agreement, RCEP, for example, FTAAP, these kind of regional agreement.
I think Japan will definitely feel more pressure now. Korean and Japanese companies are really competing against each other head to head in Chinese market. So Japanese companies cannot really sustain long time being discriminated against in Chinese market. So Japan now knows that ultimate way to get out of the current isolation is to have, trilateral FTA or RCEP in place. Plus, I think a Korea-China FTA may provide a certain template for the trilateral FTA in several selected sectors, such as services, investment, and trade norms, as I emphasized. You know, we are all aware that the U.S.-Canada FTA provided really driving force for the NAFTA by exercising enormous pressure toward Mexico. So in the end, by having really comprehensive FTA between two countries in Northeast Asia, I think Japan will ultimately pretty much under the pressure to join trilateral FTA. That will give more pressure to RCEP and possibly TPP negotiation. On top of that, I think from the point of China, in order to come into TPP, accede to the TPP, because TPP is such a high level in terms of market access, China really need to learn or some lesson from intermediate FTA, such as Korea-China FTA, which is quite FTA with the highly advanced economies, such as Korea. So I think it will give a lot of valuable lesson for China, in order to approach high-level FTA such as TPP.
We have only less than a minute to go, so I want to have maybe 20 seconds from both of you. One question. Politics necessarily going to be beneficial for economic and trade deals in our region, or actually the other way around, trade still going to be a great force in pushing politics ever closer? As we all understand, regionally we have some problem here, at least in Northeast Asia. Professor Choi, 20 seconds for you.
I think political security and cooperation in Asia is really key word these days, because Asian countries are struggling with a lot of territory issue or other cultural dispute. So I think cooperation spirit that will be engendered by the Korea-China FTA through norm setting process and dispute settlement process will really be playing a positive role in that ultimate integration process in Asia.
I see. Professor Liu, 20 seconds.
Yeah, I think the quality of standard for consumption on the people's side, and also productivity and low cost trade and operation will also be the benefit of the industry. So the economic consideration will definitely be the driver force for the further integration and behind all the politics.
Behind all the politics, we hope that will be really a productive force. Thank you so much, Professor Liu Baocheng here with us in Beijing, and also Professor Wang Mok Choi from South Korea originally, now in Singapore as a visiting professor. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us.